In the shadowed halls of Blackthorn Manor, a forgotten inventor lies deadshot in a locked room, a revolver by his side. Was it suicide or murder? Enter Sherlock Holmes, the meticulous Belgian detective whose little gray cells see what others miss. A circle of suspects, each with secrets, each with motives, hides behind polite smiles. Who tampered with the latch? What drove a killer to silence genius? And can Holmes unravel the truth before the ghost of Elias Warwick claims another soul? Dive into a chilling mystery of betrayal, logic, and a shocking twist that will leave you breathless. Chapter 1. The Whisper of Wraithmore. Mist hung low over Wraithmore Grange, a sprawling, ivy-clad manor nestled in the desolate reaches of the Devonshire moors. Its Gothic spires pierced the grey dawn, and its mullioned windows, fogged with condensation, seemed to conceal secrets older than the stones themselves. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and heather, and a faint, mournful wind whispered through the gnarled oaks that guarded the estate. To Captain Arthur Hastings, who stood at the wrought-iron gates, the scene was one of eerie beauty, tinged with an indefinable sense of foreboding. Beside him, Hercule Poirot, immaculate in his tailored overcoat and polished boots, surveyed the manor with a gaze as sharp as a rapier. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice crisp despite the chill. "This Wraithmore Grange, it is not a place of warmth and welcome, non? The very air speaks of secrets, of things hidden in the shadows." Hastings shivered, pulling his scarf tighter. "You're right, Poirot. There's something uncanny about it. I half expect a ghost to appear at any moment." Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. "Ghosts, Hastings? Non. The specters that haunt this place are of the humankind greed, fear, betrayal. These are the phantoms we shall pursue." Their arrival at Wraithmore Grange had been prompted by an urgent summons from Inspector Japp, who awaited them within. The previous night, under the shroud of a moonless sky, Dr. Elias Varnholt, a reclusive inventor and master of the manor, had vanished from his locked laboratory. No trace remained save a cryptic note scrawled in his hand, reading, "The Ghost returns at midnight." The household, a small circle of family and retainers, was in disarray, their alibis muddled by fear and suspicion. Japp, out of his depth in this closed-circle mystery, had turned to Poirot, whose reputation for unraveling the impossible preceded him. As they approached the manor's heavy oak door, it creaked open to reveal Mrs. Lavinia Varnholt, the inventor's sister-in-law, a woman of middle years whose severe black dress and tightly pinned hair bespoke a rigid disposition. Her eyes, however, betrayed a flicker of unease as she greeted them. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, thank heaven you've come. This house, it's cursed, I tell you. Elias's disappearance is no ordinary matter." Poirot inclined his head, his manner courteous yet probing. "Madame, I assure you, there is no curse that the little gray cells cannot dispel. Pray, lead us to the scene of this disappearance." The interior of Wraithmore Grange was a labyrinth of dark wood and faded grandeur. The great hall, lit by a chandelier of tarnished brass, was lined with portraits of stern-faced Varnholts, their eyes seeming to follow the visitors. A grand staircase spiraled upward, its banister carved with intricate gears and cogs, a nod to the family's legacy of invention. Mrs. Varnholt led them through a series of corridors, each more oppressive than the last, until they reached the laboratory door, a slab of iron reinforced with bolts, its surface etched with faint, inexplicable scratches. Inside, the laboratory was a marvel of controlled chaos. Workbenches were strewn with blueprints, gears, and half-assembled contraptions. Their purpose is obscure. A massive orrery dominated one corner, its planets frozen mid-orbit, while a telescope pointed toward a skylight fogged with mist. At the center of the room stood a desk, its surface bare save for the cryptic note and a single cracked lens from a pair of spectacles. The air carried a faint metallic tang, mingled with the scent of oil and something less definable, fear perhaps. Inspector Japp, His coat rumpled from a sleepless night, greeted them with a weary nod. "Poirot, you're a sight for sore eyes. This place gives me the creeps. Dr. Varnholt was last seen here at 10 p.m. last night. Door locked from the inside, windows barred, no sign of a struggle. Just that blasted note about a ghost. The locals are already whispering about some old legend tied to the manor." Poirot's eyes gleamed as he surveyed the room, his small hands adjusting his gloves with precision. "A ghost, Inspector? Non. Ghosts do not leave notes, nor do they lock doors. Let us meet the household, for it is among the living that we shall find our answers." Mrs. Varnholt ushered in the remaining occupants of Wraithmore Grange, each a study in tension. First was Miss Beatrice Varnholt, the inventor's niece, a pale young woman of 25 with auburn hair and eyes that darted nervously. Her delicate hands twisted a handkerchief, and her voice trembled as she spoke of her uncle's reclusive habits. "He was obsessed with his work," she said. "He spoke of a great invention, something that would change the world. But lately, he seemed afraid." Next came Mr. Cornelius Blake, a former colleague of Dr. Varnholt, now a guest at the manor. His sharp features and slick-back hair gave him the air of a man accustomed to control, though his forced smile betrayed unease. "Elias was brilliant but eccentric," he said. "He'd lock himself in here for days. I heard nothing last night. My room's at the other end of the manor." The butler, Mr. Gideon Finch, a stooped man with a face like weathered parchment, stood silently by the door. His eyes, sunken and watchful, seemed to hold secrets of their own. "I brought Dr. Varnholt his tea at 9:30 p.m., he said, his voice low. "He was alone, as always. I locked the door behind me, as he instructed." Finally there was Miss Sylvia Harrow, the housekeeper, a stout woman with a brisk manner and a habit of avoiding eye contact. "I was in the kitchen all evening," she insisted. "I heard nothing, saw nothing. This talk of ghosts is nonsense." Poirot listened, his head tilted, his expression one of polite interest. Yet Hastings, who knew his friend well, recognized the glint in his eyes, a sign that the little gray cells were already at work. Poirot paced the laboratory, his steps measured, pausing to examine the note, the lens, and a faint smudge of ash on the floor near the desk. He knelt, his fingers brushing the ash, then stood abruptly, his gaze sharpening. "Curio," he murmured. "This ash, it is not from a fire. It is chemical. And this lens, why is it cracked? Hastings, observe the orrery. The planet Mars, it is misaligned, non. A man of Dr. Varnholt's precision would not permit such an error." Hastings, peering at the orrery, nodded. "You're right, Poirot. It's off by a fraction. But what does it mean?" Poirot did not answer, instead turning to Mrs. Varnholt. "Madame, tell me of this ghost the locals speak of. What is the legend of Wraithmore?" Her lips tightened, but she spoke. "It's an old tale. A century ago, an inventor named Silas Varnholt died here, supposedly betrayed by his partner. They say his spirit haunts the manor, appearing at midnight to those who tamper with his work." Elias laughed at the story, but lately he seemed to believe it. Poirot's mustache twitched. "A ghost who writes notes, perhaps." "Non, madame. The truth is not so fantastical. Inspector, I shall require a map of the manor and a list of all who were present last night, with their precise movements from 9 p.m. to midnight." Japp nodded, scribbling in his notebook. "I'll have it by evening, Poirot. But what are you thinking? Is Varnholt dead, or has he done a runner?" Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Dead or alive, Inspector, he has left us a puzzle. And Hercule Poirot, he does not rest until the puzzle is solved." As the household dispersed, Hastings lingered, watching Poirot examine the note once more. The words, "The ghost returns at midnight," seemed to pulse with hidden meaning. The manor, with its creaking floors and shadowed corners, felt alive with secrets, And Hastings knew that Poirot's methodical mind was already piecing together the first threads of a mystery that would test even his genius. Chapter 2. The vanishing. The heavy iron door of Dr. Elias Varnholt's laboratory stood as a silent sentinel, its surface unyielding under the scrutiny of Hercule Poirot's piercing gaze. The morning mist that clung to Wraithmoor Grange had begun to lift, revealing the stark outlines of the manor's Gothic facade. But within the laboratory, the air remained thick with mystery. Captain Arthur Hastings stood near the cluttered workbench, his eyes tracing the cryptic note, "The ghost returns at midnight," that lay upon the desk, its ink stark against the pale parchment. The cracked spectacle lens and the smudge of chemical ash on the floor seemed to pulse with unspoken significance, and Hastings felt the weight of the unknown pressing upon him. Poirot, his small figure radiating purpose, moved methodically about the room, his gloved hands hovering over the array of scientific instruments as if reading their secrets through touch alone. The laboratory was a testament to Dr. Varnholt's genius. Blueprints of intricate machines covered the walls. A half-assembled contraption of gears and wires sat on a bench, and the great orrery in the corner, with its misaligned planet Mars, loomed like a mechanical oracle. Yet it was the absence of the inventor himself that dominated the scene, a void as palpable as the metallic tang in the air. "Poirot," Hastings ventured, his voice low, "do you think Dr. Varnholt is truly gone? Could he have staged this disappearance, perhaps to escape some threat?" Poirot paused, his fingers brushing the edge of the desk where the note lay. "A possibility, mon ami, but one must not leap to conclusions. The locked door, the barred windows, the note, these are not the actions of a man who merely wishes to vanish. Non, there is purpose here, and purpose implies intent, perhaps malevolent." Inspector Japp, who had been conferring with a constable near the door, approached with a furrowed brow. "I've had my men search the manor top to bottom, Poirot. No sign of Varnholt dead or alive. The household's in a state, whispering about that blasted ghost story. I've got their statements, but they're a muddle. Nobody admits to seeing anything after 10 p.m. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his mind at work. "Bon, Inspector, let us examine these statements, for it is in the words of the living that we shall find the truth. But first, tell me of the lock on this door." "It was secured from the inside, oui." Japp nodded, gesturing to the iron door. "Solid as a vault. The key was still in the lock inside when we broke in this morning. No way anyone could have locked it from the outside without leaving a trace." "Curio," Poirot murmured, stepping to the door and examining the lock with a magnifying glass. No scratches, no signs of tampering. And yet, the scratches on the door's surface, these are not recent, but they suggest struggle perhaps from another time. "Hastings, note this, s'il vous plaît." Hastings scribbled in his notebook, his mind racing to keep pace with Poirot's observations. The laboratory, with its barred windows and single entrance, seemed an impossible scene for a disappearance. Yet the evidence or lack thereof pointed to something deliberate. Poirot turned to the desk, lifting the cracked lens and holding it to the light. "This lens, it is from Dr. Varnholt's spectacles, non? Yet why only one? The other, where is it? And this ash chemical, not from a fire. It suggests an experiment, or perhaps destruction." Mrs. Lavinia Varnholt, who had lingered near the door, spoke up, her voice sharp with impatience. "Mr. Poirot, this is all very well, but what of Elias? He was working on a machine, a revolutionary device," he said. "Could someone have taken him to steal it?" Poirot's eyes narrowed, studying her. "Madame, what was the nature of this device? And who knew of it?" Mrs. Varnholt hesitated, her hand smoothing her black dress. "He was secretive, even with me. Something about harnessing energy, a power source unlike any other. Only Mr. Blake, his old colleague, might know more. Elias trusted him, though I never understood why." Poirot nodded, filing the information away. Merci, madame. Now, let us hear from the others. Their alibis, their movements, these will tell us much. The household gathered in the manor's drawing room, a cavernous space with heavy drapes and a roaring fire that did little to dispel the chill. Miss Beatrice Varnholt sat near the hearth, her auburn hair catching the firelight, her handkerchief now a crumpled ball in her hands. Mr. Cornelius Blake leaned against a bookcase, his sharp eyes watching Poirot with a mix of curiosity and wariness. Mr. Gideon Finch, the butler, stood stiffly by the door, his gaunt face impassive, while Miss Sylvia Harrow, the housekeeper, busied herself adjusting a vase, her movements betraying nervous energy. Poirot stood at the center, his small stature commanding the room. "Mies Amos," he began, his voice clear and precise. "Dr. Varnholt has vanished, leaving behind a note that speaks of a ghost. Yet I, Hercule Poirot, do not believe in phantoms. Let us establish the facts. Mademoiselle Beatrice, you last saw your uncle at what hour?" Beatrice's voice trembled. "At 9 p.m. in the dining room. He was distracted, muttering about his work. I went to my room after that to read. And you, Monsieur Blake?" Poirot's gaze shifted to the former colleague. Blake shrugged, his smile thin. "I was in the library until 10:30 p.m., working on my own notes. I heard nothing unusual. Elias often worked late, so I thought nothing of it." Poirot turned to the butler. "Monsieur Finch, you brought tea to the laboratory at 9:30 p.m. Did you notice anything amiss?" Finch's voice was steady, almost too steady. "No, sir. Dr. Varnholt was at his desk, scribbling as usual. I locked the door as he requested and returned to my duties in the pantry. And you, Mademoiselle Harrow?" Poirot's eyes fixed on the housekeeper. "I was in the kitchen, preparing for breakfast," she said briskly. "I retired at 10 p.m. The manor was quiet." Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, pacing slowly. "And yet, at midnight, Dr. Varnholt was gone, his laboratory locked, his note left behind. Curious, non? Tell me, Madame Varnholt, who else had access to the laboratory?" "No one," she said firmly. "Elias was obsessive about privacy. Only he had the key." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And yet, the key was found inside. A locked room, a missing man, a ghost that writes notes. These are not mysteries, but puzzles. And Hercule Poirot, he solves puzzles." Hastings, watching from a corner, noted the tension in the room. Beatrice's hands shook. Blake's smile faltered. Finch's eyes avoided Poirot's, and Harrow's fingers twitched as she adjusted her apron. Mrs. Varnholt's rigid posture suggested a woman guarding secrets of her own. The legend of Silas Varnholt's ghost, betrayed a century ago, hung over the room like a specter, though Poirot dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "Inspector," Poirot said, turning to Japp, "I shall require a thorough search of the laboratory for any hidden passages. The manor is old. Such places often conceal secrets. And I wish to see Dr. Varnholt's blueprints. His invention, it may hold the key." Japp nodded, scribbling in his notebook. "I'll have my men on it, Poirot. But this ghost business, it's got the servants spooked. They say Silas Varnholt's spirit guards the manor's secrets." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "Let the servants talk, Inspector. The truth, it is not found in whispers, but in facts. The ash, the lens, the note, these are the voices I listen to." As the household dispersed, Poirot lingered in the drawing room, his eyes scanning the portraits on the walls. One, of Silas Varnholt, depicted a man with a gaunt face and piercing eyes, a gear clutched in his hand. "Hastings," Poirot said softly, "this inventor Silas, he was betrayed. And now, Elias vanishes with a note about a ghost. Coincidence? None. The past, it casts a long shadow." Hastings shivered, the weight of the mystery settling over him. Wraithmore Grange, with its locked rooms and whispered legends, was a puzzle unlike any he had faced. Yet with Poirot at his side, he knew. The truth, however elusive, would not remain hidden for long. Chapter 3. The arrival of Poirot. The wind howled across the Devonshire moors, rattling the windows of Wraithmoor Grange as Hercule Poirot stood in the grand hall, his small, immaculate figure a stark contrast to the brooding opulence around him. The flickering light of the chandelier cast dancing shadows on the oak-paneled walls, where portraits of long-dead Varnholts seemed to watch with silent judgment. Captain Arthur Hastings, clutching his notebook, felt a chill that had little to do with the draught seeping through the manor's ancient stones. The disappearance of Dr. Elias Varnholt, locked within his impregnable laboratory, had cast a pall over the household, and the cryptic note, "The ghost returns at midnight," only deepened the enigma. Poirot, his eyes sharp as polished steel, adjusted his gloves with meticulous care. "Mon ami," he said, turning to Hastings, "this manor, it is a stage, and we are now players in a drama most intriguing. The locked room, the note, the whispers of a ghost, these are but props. The truth, it lies in the hearts of those who remain." Hastings nodded, though his mind was still reeling from the morning's revelations. But Poirot, how could anyone have entered or left that laboratory? The door was locked from the inside, the windows barred. "It's impossible." Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. "Impossible? Non-Hastings. The impossible is merely a challenge to the little gray cells. Come, let us see what Inspector Japp has discovered." They found Japp in the library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound tomes and heavy velvet drapes. The inspector stood by a long table, poring over a map of the manor hastily sketched by one of his constables. His face was etched with frustration, his coat rumpled from hours of fruitless searching. "Poirot, I've had my men comb every inch of this place," he said, looking up. "No hidden passages, no secret doors. The laboratory's a fortress, and yet Varnholt's gone, vanished like smoke." Poirot approached the table, his eyes scanning the map with the precision of a cartographer. "Bon, Inspector. But tell me, what of the household's movements? Their alibis, they are precise?" Japp sighed, flipping open his notebook. "As precise as a fog bank. Mrs. Varnholt says she was in her sitting room, writing letters, until 11 p.m. Miss Beatrice was in her bedroom, reading. After 9 p.m. Mr. Blake claims he was in here, working on his own papers, until 10:30. Finch, the butler, says he was in the pantry after delivering tea at 9:30. And Miss Harrow, the housekeeper, was in the kitchen until 10 o'clock, then retired. Nobody admits to hearing or seeing anything near the laboratory after 10 p.m. Poirot's gaze lingered on the map, his finger tracing the corridor leading to the laboratory. And yet, at midnight, Dr. Varnholt was gone, his note left behind. "The key, Inspector, where is it now?" Japp gestured to a small evidence bag on the table, containing a heavy iron key. "Found it in the lock, inside the laboratory, just as I said. No fingerprints but Varnholt's, though the constables had to break the door to get in." "Curio," Poirot murmured, lifting the key and examining it through his monocle. "A key inside a locked room, yet no man within. And these scratches on the door, old but deliberate, they suggest resistance, perhaps, from a time long past." Hastings, standing by the fireplace, glanced at the portrait of Silas Varnholt, the forgotten inventor whose supposed ghost haunted the manor. The man's gaunt face and piercing eyes seemed to hold a challenge, as if daring Poirot to uncover the truth. "Poirot," Hastings said, "do you think this ghost story has anything to do with it? Mrs. Varnholt said Elias was afraid lately, as if he believed the legend." Poirot waved a hand dismissively. "The ghost of Silas Varnholt, betrayed a century ago. Non-Hastings. The living are far more dangerous than the dead. But the legend, it may serve a purpose to distract, to confuse. Let us speak with the household again, for their words, They betray more than they know. Mrs. Lavinia Varnholt entered first, her black dress rustling as she sat stiffly in a high-backed chair. Her face was a mask of composure, but her fingers twisted a lace handkerchief, betraying her unease. "Mr. Poirot," she said, "I trust you found something? This waiting is intolerable." Poirot inclined his head, his manner courteous yet probing. "Madame, tell me of Dr. Varnholt's invention. You spoke of a device to harness energy. Was it valuable enough to provoke envy?" Her lips tightened. Elias was secretive, but he hinted at a machine that could power entire cities. He said it would revolutionize industry. Mr. Blake knew more. He and Elias worked together years ago, before a falling out. I warned Elias not to trust him. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A falling out? Of what nature?" Mrs. Varnholt hesitated, then said, "Professional jealousy. Blake claimed Elias stole his ideas. They parted ways bitterly, but Elias invited him here last month, saying he wanted to make amends." Next came Miss Beatrice Varnholt, her pale face framed by auburn curls. Her hands trembled as she spoke. "Uncle Elias was different these past weeks. He'd lock himself in the laboratory for hours, muttering about the ghost. He said it was watching him, that it knew his secrets." Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle but insistent. "And what secrets, mademoiselle? Did he confide in you?" Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. "Only that his invention was nearly complete, but dangerous. He said if it fell into the wrong hands. I begged him to stop, but he wouldn't listen." Mr. Cornelius Blake entered with a forced smile, his sharp features accentuated by the firelight. "Mr. Poirot, I assure you, I have no knowledge of Elias's disappearance. We were colleagues once, yes, but I was here as a guest, nothing more." Poirot's gaze was unyielding. "And yet, monsieur, you knew of his invention. Did you not resent him for past grievances?" Blake's smile faltered. "That was years ago. I've moved on. Elias was working on something extraordinary, but he kept me at arm's length. I was in the library all evening, as I told the inspector. The butler, Mr. Gideon Finch, was next, his gaunt frame seeming to blend into the shadows. I saw nothing. 'Sir,' he said, his voice low, 'I brought Dr. Varnholt his tea at 9:30, locked the door as he wished, and returned to the pantry. The manor was quiet.' 'And you, Mademoiselle Harrow?' Poirot asked as the housekeeper entered, her brisk manner barely masking her unease. 'I was in the kitchen, as I said,' she replied, her eyes avoiding his. 'I heard no disturbances. This ghost nonsense is just that, nonsense.' Poirot paced. Slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. A locked room, a missing inventor, a note about a ghost, and alibis that align too neatly. Me's in this, the truth is like a machine. It requires all parts to function. One piece is missing, and I shall find it." As the household dispersed, Poirot returned to the laboratory, Hastings at his heels. He knelt by the desk, examining the chemical ash once more. "This ash," he said, "it is from a compound perhaps used in Varnholt's experiments. And the cracked lens, why leave it behind? Hastings, check the orrery again. The misalignment, it is deliberate, non?" Hastings peered at the orrery, noting the slight tilt of Mars. "You're right, Poirot. It's off, but it doesn't look accidental. Could it be a clue?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A clue or a distraction? We shall see. Inspector, I wish to examine Dr. Varnholt's blueprints. They may reveal why he vanished and who wished him gone." Japp nodded, gesturing to a constable. "I'll have them brought up from the laboratory. But Poirot, what's your theory? Is Varnholt dead or hiding?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The truth, Inspector, is like the moor outside vast. Hidden, but not beyond reach. The little gray cells, they are already at work." As the constable departed, Hastings glanced at the note on the desk. Its words, "The ghost returns at midnight," seeming to pulse with menace. Wraithmore Grange, with its secrets and shadows, was a puzzle worthy of Poirot's genius, and Hastings knew the game was only beginning. Chapter 4. The questions begin. The library of Wraithmore Grange was a sanctuary of shadows, its towering shelves laden with dusty tomes that seemed to whisper secrets of their own. The fire in the hearth cast a flickering glow across the room, illuminating the intricate carvings of gears and cogs that adorned the mantelpiece, a silent testament to the Varnholt family's legacy of invention. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small, meticulous figure commanding the attention of the gathered household. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, moved from face to face, as if peeling back the layers of politeness to reveal the truths beneath. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated at a side table with his notebook open, felt the tension in the air, thick as the moorland mist outside. The disappearance of Dr. Elias Varnholt, locked within his impregnable laboratory, had set the manor ablaze with suspicion, and Poirot was now poised to fan the flames. "Mes Amis," Poirot began, his voice clear and precise, cutting through the oppressive silence. "We are gathered to unravel the mystery of Dr. Varnholt's disappearance. A locked room, a cryptic note, a ghost that haunts the whispers of this house. These are the pieces of our puzzle. But it is in your words, your gestures, your silences, that I, Hercule Poirot, shall find the truth." The household sat in a semicircle of high-backed chairs, their faces a study in unease. Mrs. Lavinia Varnholt, her black dress stark against her pale skin, clutched her lace handkerchief, her eyes darting nervously. Miss Beatrice Varnholt, the inventor's niece, sat with her hands folded tightly, her auburn hair catching the firelight as she avoided Poirot's gaze. Mr. Cornelius Blake, the former colleague, leaned back with a forced air of nonchalance, though his fingers tapped restlessly on the armrest. Mr. Gideon Finch, the butler, stood near the door, his gaunt frame rigid, his eyes fixed on some distant point. Miss Sylvia Harrow, the housekeeper, busied herself straightening her apron, her brisk movements betraying a flicker of anxiety. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Let us begin with the facts. At 9:30 p.m. last night, monsieur, Finch delivered tea to Dr. Varnholt in his laboratory. The door was locked, as per his custom. At midnight, the laboratory was found empty, save for a note reading, 'The ghost returns at midnight,' a cracked spectacle lens, and a smudge of chemical ash. No one claims to have seen or heard anything after 10 p.m., and yet Dr. Varnholt is gone. Curious, non?" He paused, his gaze settling on Mrs. Varnholt. "Madame, you were in your sitting room, writing letters, until 11 p.m. Tell me, what did you hear in the manor during those hours?" Mrs. Varnholt's lips tightened, her voice steady but strained. "Nothing out of the ordinary, Mr. Poirot. The manor is old, it creaks and groans. I heard the wind, perhaps, but no footsteps, no voices." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And the letters you wrote, who were they to?" She hesitated, her fingers twisting the handkerchief. "To my sister in London and a solicitor regarding estate matters." It was routine. "Routine," Poirot repeated softly, his eyes narrowing. "Bon. And you, Mademoiselle Beatrice? You were reading in your room after 9 p.m. What book, may I ask?" Beatrice's hands trembled, her voice barely above a whisper. "A novel, Wuthering Heights. I couldn't sleep, so I read until nearly midnight. I heard nothing, I swear." Poirot's gaze softened, but only slightly. "And yet, mademoiselle, your uncle spoke of fear, of a ghost. Did he share these fears with you?" Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. "He said the ghost of Silas Varnholt was watching him. He was so secretive about his work, but he mentioned a machine, a power source. He said it was dangerous, that someone might want to steal it." Poirot turned to Mr. Blake, whose smile was now a thin veneer. "Monsieur Blake, you were in this very library until 10:30 p.m., a man of science, like Dr. Varnholt. Tell me, What was the nature of your past disagreement? Blake's fingers stilled, his voice cool. A professional matter, long resolved. Eloyus and I collaborated on energy experiments years ago. He took credit for a design I contributed to. I forgave him, and he invited me here to discuss a new project. I was working on my own notes last night, as I told the inspector. Poirot's mustache twitched. And yet, you knew of his invention. Did you see his blueprints? Blake shook his head. He kept them locked away. Elias was paranoid, always locking doors, checking windows. I saw nothing of his work. Poirot moved to Mr. Finch, whose gaunt face remained impassive. Monsieur Finch, you delivered tea at 9:30 p.m., described Dr. Varnholt's demeanor. Finch's voice was low, measured. He was agitated, sir. Scribbling at his desk, muttering about his machine. He barely acknowledged me. I locked the door and left. And you, Mademoiselle Harrow? Poirot's eyes fixed on the housekeeper, who froze mid-motion. I was in the kitchen. As I said, she replied, her tone clipped. I heard nothing, saw nothing. I retired at 10 p.m. Poirot stopped pacing, his hands clasped before him. A household so quiet, yet a man vanishes. The note, it speaks of a ghost, but I see no specters, only secrets. Let us examine the laboratory once more, for the truth, it hides in the details. He led the way back to the laboratory, Hastings and Inspector Japp trailing behind. The iron door, now propped open, revealed the same chaotic scene. Blueprints, gears, the orrery with its misaligned Mars, the cracked lens, and the ash smudge. Poirot knelt by the desk, his magnifying glass glinting as he examined the ash. This is no ordinary ash, he said. It is from a chemical reaction, perhaps phosphorus, or a compound used in Varnholt's experiments. And the lens, why is it cracked? A struggle or a deliberate act? Hastings, peering at the orrery, noted the faint scratches around Mars's base. Poirot, these marks on the orrery, they're fresh. Could they mean something? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Precise, met Hastings. The orrery, it is not merely decorative. It is a clue, or perhaps a message. And this note. He lifted the parchment, studying the handwriting. The ink is fresh, the script hurried. Dr. Varnholt wrote it under duress, perhaps, or to warn. Japp, standing by the barred windows, shook his head. Poirot, I've checked these bars. They're solid. No one could have climbed out, and the chimney's too narrow for a man to fit. It's a locked room mystery, plain and simple. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Simple, Inspector? None. The locked room, it is a challenge, but not an impossibility. The key, the scratches, the ash, these are the threads of our tapestry. We must weave them carefully. He turned to a stack of blueprints on a side table, carefully unrolling. 1. The diagram depicted a complex machine, its purpose unclear, but annotated with Varnholt's precise handwriting. Energy conduit prototype Alpha. Poirot's fingers traced the lines, his brow furrowing. This machine, it is the heart of the mystery. Someone coveted it, or feared it. Hastings, scribbling in his notebook, glanced up. Do you think one of them, Blake, perhaps wanted the invention? Or could Varnholt have staged this to protect it? Poirot's gaze was distant. A possibility, mon ami, but the note suggests otherwise. The ghost returns at midnight. It is a message, not a jest. The legend of Silas Varnholt, betrayed by his partner, it echoes here. History, it seems, repeats itself. As they left the laboratory, the manor's corridors seemed to close in, the portraits watching their every step. Hastings felt a shiver, the weight of the mystery growing heavier. Poirot, however, walked with the confidence of a man who saw not shadows, but patterns. The questions had begun, and with them, the first cracks in the household's facades. The truth, Hastings knew, was only a matter of time. Chapter 5. The red herrings, the afternoon light struggled through the heavy clouds that hung over Wraithmoor Grange, casting a pallid glow across the manor's Gothic facade. Inside, the air was thick with suspicion, as if the very walls of the old house absorbed the unease of its inhabitants. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing-room, his small, meticulous figure a beacon of order amidst the growing disarray. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the faces of the household, each a mask of carefully guarded secrets. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near a window with his notebook open, felt the tension mounting, a storm brewing beneath the surface of polite civility. The disappearance of Dr. Elias Varnholt, locked within his impregnable laboratory, had ignited whispers of ghosts and betrayal, and now, as Poirot's investigation deepened, the first threads of deception began to unravel. Inspector Japp, his face etched with frustration, paced near the fireplace, where a portrait of Silas Varnholt glared down with accusing eyes. "Poirot," he said, his voice rough, "we've turned this place upside down. No trace of Varnholt, no hidden passages, no blood, nothing. The locals are convinced it's the ghost of old Silas, and now the servants are jumping at shadows. But I've got my eye on Cornelius Blake. He's too slick, and that old grudge with Varnholt gives him motive." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Mon cher Inspector, you seize upon Monsieur Blake as the obvious suspect, non? A red herring, perhaps, placed to distract us. But Hercule Poirot, he does not chase shadows. Let us examine the evidence, not the rumors." He turned to the household, gathered once more in the drawing-room's oppressive grandeur. Mrs. Lavinia Varnholt sat rigid, her black dress a stark contrast to her pale, strained face. Miss Beatrice Varnholt clutched her handkerchief, her auburn hair falling loosely as if her composure were fraying. Mr. Cornelius Blake leaned against a bookcase, his sharp features set in a practiced calm, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Mr. Gideon Finch, the butler, stood by the door, his gaunt frame as still as a statue, while Miss Sylvia Harrow, the housekeeper, fidgeted with a tray of tea, her brisk manner faltering. "Mies Amos," Poirot began, his voice clear and resonant. "The disappearance of Dr. Varnholt is no work of ghosts, but of human hands. The note, the ghost returns at midnight, the cracked lens, the chemical ash, these are not phantoms, but clues. And yet, one among you seeks to lead us astray. Let us test your alibis once more, for the truth, it hides in the contradictions." He turned to Mr. Blake, whose smile tightened. "Monsieur Blake, you were in the library until 10:30 p.m., oui? Yet the maid Eliza saw a man matching your description in the west corridor at 10:15. How do you explain this?" Blake's eyes widened, but he recovered quickly. "Eliza must be mistaken. The west corridor is near the library. I may have stepped out briefly to fetch a book. The manor's lighting is poor, and she's a nervous girl, prone to fancy." Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. "A book, you say? Curious, for the library is well stocked. And this book, what was its title?" Blake hesitated, his fingers tapping the armrest. "A treatise on thermodynamics. I don't recall the exact title." It was unimportant. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Bon, we shall verify this with Eliza. And you, Mademoiselle Harrow? You claim to have retired at 10 p.m., yet the kitchen clock, it runs 5 minutes fast. Did you perhaps linger longer?" Miss Harrow's hands froze on the tea tray, her face flushing. I may have misjudged the time. I was tidying up, that's all." The kitchen was empty after 10 o'clock. Empty. Yet the tea leaves in the pot you prepared for Dr. Varnholt were still warm when the laboratory was open at 6 a.m. Poirot said, his voice soft but piercing. "Tea does not stay warm for 8 hours, mademoiselle." A murmur rippled through the room. Mrs. Varnholt's handkerchief twisted tighter, and Beatrice's eyes darted toward the housekeeper. Finch, ever silent, shifted his weight, his sunken eyes fixed on the floor. Poirot turned to Mrs. Varnholt. Madame, you wrote letters until 11 p.m., yet your ink bottle, it was nearly empty this morning, and the blotting paper bore traces of a hurried hand. Were these letters so urgent, or were you writing something else? Mrs. Varnholt's lips parted, but no sound came. I wrote to my sister, as I said. The solicitor's letter took time. I was upset, distracted. Poirot repeated, his tone deceptively mild. And yet, you did not hear the manor's creaks, the footsteps, the whispers of a household awake at midnight? Before she could respond, Poirot pivoted to Beatrice. Mademoiselle, you read Wuthering Heights until midnight. A romantic tale. Non, yet your book, when I examined it, was open to the same page as the night before. Did you truly read, or were you elsewhere? Beatrice's face paled, her voice trembling. I was in my room. I may have dozed off. Uncle Elias's talk of ghosts frightened me. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Fear, it is a powerful motive, and you, Monsieur Finch? Your pantry duties kept you occupied, yet the silver tray you used for the tea bore a faint smudge of chemical ash, identical to that found in the laboratory. How did it come to be there? Finch's gaunt face remained impassive, but his hands clenched briefly. I know nothing of ash, sir. I polished the tray before serving the tea. Perhaps it came from the laboratory itself. Perhaps, Poirot sighed, his voice laced with skepticism. But the little gray cells, they do not believe in coincidence. Hastings, scribbling furiously, marveled at Poirot's ability to turn innocuous details into damning questions. The household's alibis, so neatly aligned, were beginning to fray, and Blake's presence in the west corridor seemed to cast a shadow over the others. Was he the obvious suspect, as Japp believed, or a convenient distraction? Poirot returned to the laboratory, Hastings and Japp in tow. The room was as they had left it. The orrery with its misaligned Mars, the blueprints, the cracked lens, and the note. Poirot knelt by the ash smudge, his magnifying glass glinting. This ash, he said, it is from a compound, perhaps a byproduct of Varnholt's energy conduit. And the lens, its crack is precise, as if struck with intent. Hastings examined the orrery again. The scratches around Mars, they are not random. Hastings peered at the orrery, noting the faint, deliberate marks. You're right, Poirot. They form a pattern almost like a code. Poirot's eyes sparkled. A code, mon ami? Or a message? Dr. Varnholt was a man of precision. He would not leave his orrery misaligned without reason. Japp, rubbing his chin, interjected. So you think Blake's our man? He's got the motive. Old grudges, maybe wanting Varnholt's invention. And that corridor sighting puts him near the laboratory. Poirot raised a hand. Patience, Inspector. Monsieur Blake is a possibility, but a red herring is only as useful as the hand that places it. The ash, the lens, the note, these point to a deeper truth. We must look beyond the obvious. As they left the laboratory, the manor's corridors seemed to close in, the portraits of past Varnholts watching with silent accusation. Hastings felt a shiver, the ghost story lingering in his mind despite Poirot's dismissal. Blake's shaky alibi, Harrow's warm tea, Finch's ash-stained tray, each was a thread in a tapestry of deception. Poirot, with his relentless logic, was already weaving them together, but the pattern remained elusive, a puzzle that promised more revelations to come. Chapter 6. A clue in detail. Wind howled mournfully across the Devonshire moors, its keening voice seeping through the ancient walls of Wraithmoor Grange. Within the manor's library, the fire had dwindled to embers, casting a feeble glow. That did little to dispel the oppressive gloom. Hercule Poirot stood before a long oak table, his small, meticulous figure illuminated by a single oil lamp. His eyes, sharp as a falcon's, were fixed on a collection of objects he had gathered from Dr. Elias Varnholt's laboratory. The cryptic note, reading, "The ghost returns at midnight," the cracked spectacle lens, a vial of chemical ash, and a single blueprint labeled Energy Conduit Prototype Alpha. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated nearby with his notebook open, felt the weight of the mystery pressing ever heavier, the manor's shadows seeming to pulse with secrets yet uncovered. The disappearance of Dr. Varnholt, locked within his impregnable laboratory, had baffled all but Poirot, whose methodical mind was now honing in on a single pivotal clue. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice soft yet resonant, "the truth. It is like a delicate mechanism. Each part must fit perfectly, or the whole fails. Here, in these objects, lies a detail that unlocks the puzzle. We must observe, not merely see." Hastings leaned forward, his brow furrowed. The note, the lens, the ash, they all seem so disconnected. "But you found something, haven't you, Poirot?" Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. "Precisement, Hastings. It is the Ori that speaks to me today. The misalignment of Mars, the scratches around its base, they are not accidents. They are deliberate, a message from Dr. Varnholt himself." He gestured to the orrery, which had been brought to the library for closer inspection. The intricate device, a model of the solar system, gleamed in the lamplight, its brass planet suspended on delicate arms. Mars, slightly askew, bore faint scratches that formed a subtle pattern, almost a code. Poirot traced the marks with a gloved finger, his eyes narrowing. "These scratches, they are not random. They form a sequence, perhaps a cipher. And the misalignment, it is precise, exactly 3 degrees off its orbit." Hastings scribbled in his notebook, marveling at Poirot's attention to detail. "A cipher? Like the note? Do you think Varnholt left it to point us to his fate?" Poirot nodded, his expression grave. "Oui, Hastings. Dr. Varnholt was a man of precision, a scientist who valued order. He would not allow his orrery to fall into disarray without reason. This is his voice, speaking from beyond the locked door." Inspector Japp, who had been hovering near the door, approached with a skeptical frown. "A cipher on an orrery? That's a bit fanciful, even for you, Poirot." "I'm still betting on Blake. His alibi's shaky, and he's got motive jealousy over Varnholt's invention. Why complicate things with scratches?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet amusement. "Man, cher Inspector, the obvious path is often the wrong one. Monsieur Blake, he is a convenient suspect, but the truth lies in the details. Let us test this cipher." He produced a small notebook and began sketching the scratches, noting their positions relative to Mars's orbit. After a moment, he paused, his pen hovering. "Curio. The scratches correspond to numbers 3, 7, 12, 19. A sequence, perhaps, or coordinates. We must examine the laboratory again." They returned to the laboratory, its iron door now propped open, revealing the chaotic array of blueprints, gears, and half-assembled machines. The metallic tang in the air was stronger here, mingled with the faint scent of chemicals. Poirot moved to the workbench, where a series of numbered drawers lined the wall. 3, 7, 12, 19, he murmured, opening each in turn. The third drawer contained a small vial of a silvery liquid, labeled Catalyst Alpha. The 7th held a folded diagram, its edges singed. The 12th revealed a tiny brass gear, etched with a symbol resembling a crescent moon. The 19th was empty, but its interior bore a faint smudge of the same chemical ash found on the floor. "Hastings," Poirot said, holding up the gear, "this is no ordinary component. The crescent moon, it is a signature, perhaps of Dr. Varnholt's design, or another's." Hastings peered at the gear, his mind racing. "Another's? You mean Silas Varnholt, the ghost? Or someone else?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Not a ghost, mon ami, but a legacy. The legend of Silas, betrayed by his partner, it echoes in this manner. This gear, it may link to his work or to the invention Dr. Varnholt was creating. Jap, examining the vial, shook his head. Catalyst alpha? Sounds like something from one of those penny dreadfuls. Could this be the poison that did him in? None, Inspector, Poirot said, taking the vial and sniffing it cautiously. This is no poison, but a component of his energy conduit. The ash, the gear, the singed diagram, these suggest an experiment interrupted, perhaps destroyed. But by whom? He turned to the blueprint, unrolling it carefully. The diagram depicted a complex machine, its annotations detailing a power source capable of generating immense energy. A marginal note in Varnholt's hand read, "Danger, unstable without catalyst alpha." Poirot's eyes narrowed. This machine, it was Dr. Varnholt's obsession. Someone coveted it, or feared it enough to make him vanish. Hastings, still clutching his notebook, ventured a question. Poirot, do you think Varnholt's alive? Could he have hidden himself to protect the invention? Poirot's gaze was distant. Possible, Hastings, but unlikely. The note, "The ghost returns at midnight," it is a cry for help or a warning. The cracked lens, the ash, the orrery, they tell a story of betrayal, not escape. They were interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Lavinia Varnholt, her face pale but composed. "Mr. Poirot, have you found anything? The servants are whispering that Elias was taken by Silas's ghost. It's nonsense, but it's unsettling the household." Poirot inclined his head, his manner courteous yet probing. "Madame, the ghost is but a tale to mask the truth. Tell me, did Dr. Varnholt ever speak of a crescent moon symbol in his work?" Mrs. Varnholt's eyes widened briefly before she recovered. "A crescent moon? I don't recall." Elias was secretive. He shared little, even with me. Poirot's smile was faint, but knowing. "Merci, madame. Your candor is noted." As she departed, Poirot turned to Jap. "Inspector, I wish to speak with Monsieur Blake again. His knowledge of Varnholt's work, it may be more than he claims. And the maid, Eliza, her sighting in the west corridor, it must be verified." Jap nodded, scribbling in his notebook. "I'll fetch Blake and check with Eliza. But Poirot, what's this crescent moon business? You think it's tied to the ghost legend?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The crescent moon, it is a detail that does not belong. Like the scratches on the orrery, it is a clue that points to the heart of this mystery. The little gray cells, they are beginning to see the pattern." As Jap left to summon Blake, Hastings glanced at the orrery, its misaligned Mars seeming to mock their efforts. The laboratory, with its locked door and barred windows, was a puzzle within a puzzle, and Poirot's focus on the smallest details, the ash, the gear, the scratches, only deepened the enigma. Yet Hastings knew that these fragments were the key to unraveling the truth, and with Poirot's relentless logic, the shadows of Wraithmoor Grange would soon yield their secrets. Chapter 7. More lies surfaced. The twilight cast long, creeping shadows across the moors, their inky tendrils seeping into the very stones of Wraithmoor Grange. Within the manor's dining room, a cavernous space of polished oak and flickering candelabras, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken accusations. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the long table, his small, immaculate figure a beacon of calm amidst the storm of suspicion that swirled around the household. His dark eyes, sharp and unyielding, moved from one face to another, as if peeling back the layers of deceit that cloaked each occupant. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated to one side with his notebook open, felt his pulse quicken, sensing that Poirot's methodical probing was about to unearth secrets long buried. The disappearance of Dr. Elias Varnholt, locked within his laboratory, had already revealed cracks in the household's alibis, and now, as the investigation deepened, hidden motives and bitter feuds began to surface. Poirot's hands were clasped behind his back, his voice clear and resonant as he addressed the gathered assembly. "Mes amis," he began, The puzzle of Dr. Varnholt's disappearance grows more intricate with each passing hour. The note, the ghost returns at midnight, the cracked lens, the chemical ash, the scratches on the orrery, these are not mere curiosities, but threads in a tapestry of betrayal. And now I sense that some among you conceal truths that cannot remain hidden from Hercule Poirot. The household sat in tense silence, their faces illuminated by the candlelight. Mrs. Lavinia Varnholt's rigid composure faltered, her fingers clutching her lace handkerchief until her knuckles whitened. Miss Beatrice Varnholt, her auburn hair disheveled, stared at the table, her eyes red-rimmed as if from sleepless nights. Mr. Cornelius Blake's practiced nonchalance was fraying, his sharp features set in a tight grimace. Mr. Gideon Finch, the butler, stood near the door, his gaunt frame as still as ever, though his sunken eyes darted nervously. Miss Sylvia Harrow, the housekeeper, gripped the edge of her chair, her brisk manner replaced by a strained rigidity. Poirot's gaze settled on Mr. Blake, whose presence in the west corridor at 10:15 p.m., contradicting his alibi, had already cast suspicion. "Monsieur Blake," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild, "you claim to be in the library until 10:30 p.m., yet the maid, Eliza, places you near the laboratory. And now, I learned from Inspector Japp that your financial records reveal debts that Dr. Varnholt refused to settle. Is this not so?" Blake's face flushed, his voice sharp. "Preposterous. My finances are my own affair. Elias and I had our differences, but I had no reason to harm him. I was in the library, as I said." Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "And yet, monsieur, a letter was found in your room, half-written, addressed to a creditor. It speaks of a new opportunity at Wraithmore Grange. An opportunity, perhaps, tied to Dr. Varnholt's energy conduit." A gasp escaped Beatrice, her eyes wide with shock. "Mr. Blake, you wouldn't. Uncle Elias trusted you." Blake's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Poirot pivoted to Mrs. Varnholt. "Madame, you too have been less than forthcoming. Your letters to the solicitor, they were not about routine estate matters, were they? Inspector Japp has uncovered correspondence suggesting you sought to contest Dr. Varnholt's will, which left the bulk of his fortune and his patents to Mademoiselle Beatrice." Mrs. Varnholt's face drained of color, her voice trembling. I only wish to protect the family's legacy. Elias was reckless, pouring money into that dangerous machine. I had no part in his disappearance." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet, madame, your ink bottle was nearly empty, and the blotting paper bore traces of a hurried note, not unlike the one found in the laboratory. Did you write to someone else that night?" Her lips parted, but no words came. The room seemed to shrink, the candlelight casting distorted shadows that mirrored the growing unease. Hastings, scribbling furiously, noted the cracks in the household's facade, Blake's debts, Mrs. Varnholt's ambitions, and the unspoken tensions that bound them. Poirot turned to Miss Harrow, whose hands trembled as she adjusted her apron. "Mademoiselle Harrow, the tea you prepared for Dr. Varnholt, it was warm when the laboratory was opened, suggesting it was delivered later than you claim. And the tray, it bore a smudge of chemical ash. Were you in the laboratory after 9:30? P.M. Harrow's voice was sharp, defensive. "I told you, I was in the kitchen. The tray was clean when I left it. If there's ash, it came from the laboratory, not me." "Curio," Poirot murmured, his gaze shifting to Finch. "And you, Monsieur Finch, the butler who sees all yet, speaks little. The crescent moon symbol on the gear found in the drawer, does it not resemble a mark on your pocket watch which I observed this morning?" Finch's gaunt face remained impassive, but his hand instinctively moved to his waistcoat. "A coincidence, sir. My watch is an old family heirloom. I know nothing of gears or symbols." Poirot's smile was faint but knowing. "A coincidence? Non, monsieur. The little gray cells, they do not believe in such things. The crescent moon, it links to Silas Varnholt's designs, and perhaps to Dr. Varnholt's work. Were you not once employed by Silas's partner before the betrayal that ended his life? A murmur rippled through the room, and Beatrice's handkerchief fell to the floor. "Mr. Finch, is that true?" she whispered. Finch's eyes flickered, but he remained silent, his silence louder than any confession. Poirot stepped forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of accusation. "The past, it haunts this manor, does it? Not? A betrayal a century ago, and now another inventor vanishes. The crescent moon, the ash, the orrery, these are not ghosts, but echoes of human greed." He turned to the blueprint on the table, its annotations detailing the energy conduits. Potential. This machine, it was Dr. Varnholt's triumph, but also his danger. Someone in this room knew its value and its risks. Someone sought to possess it or destroy it. Hastings, his pen pausing, felt a chill. The crescent moon symbol, the singed diagram, the warm tea, they were fragments of a larger truth, and Poirot was weaving them together with relentless precision. But whose hand had guided Varnholt's disappearance? Blake, with his debts and old grudges? Mrs. Varnholt, with her contested will? Harrow, with her suspicious tea? Or Finch, with his cryptic connection to the past? Poirot addressed the group once more. "Mies Amos, the lies, they multiply, but the truth, it is patient. I shall return to the laboratory, for the orrery cipher holds more secrets. Inspector, I require Eliza's full statement and a search of Monsieur Finch's quarters. The crescent moon, it is a key, and I shall find the lock it opens." Inspector Japp, his face grim, nodded. "I'll get on it, Poirot. But this crescent moon business, it's getting stranger by the minute. You sure Varnholt's not just hiding somewhere, laughing at us?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "None, Inspector. Dr. Varnholt is either a victim or a mastermind, but he is not laughing. The note, it was written under duress or as a warning. We shall see." As the household dispersed, their faces etched with fear and suspicion, Poirot led Hastings back to the laboratory. The orrery stood silent, its scratches glinting in the lamplight. Poirot traced the marks again, his mind a whirl of calculations. The sequence 3, 7, 12, 19, it is not random. It points to something within this room, or beyond it. Hastings, peering at the blueprint, noted a faint sketch of a crescent moon in the corner. "Poirot, look, this symbol, it's here too. Could it be a signature, or a code within the machine?" Poirot's smile was triumphant. "Precisement, Hastings. The crescent moon, it is the thread that binds past and present. The lies, they surface, but the truth, it waits." The manor's shadows seemed to deepen, the wind outside a chorus of whispers. Hastings knew that Poirot's focus on the smallest details, the ash, the gear, the cipher, was leading them closer to the heart of the mystery. But the path was fraught with deception, and the ghost of Wraithmoor Grange was far from laid to rest. Chapter 8. The emotional turning point, the heavy silence of Wraithmoor Grange was shattered by the distant tolling of a village church bell, its mournful notes echoing across the moors as dusk settled over the manor. Within the drawing room, the air was thick with tension, the flickering candlelight casting distorted shadows on the oak-paneled walls. Hercule Poirot stood before the gathered household, his small, immaculate figure radiating a quiet intensity that commanded the room. His dark eyes, sharp and unyielding, seemed to pierce the facades of those seated before him, each face a canvas of fear, guilt, and barely concealed secrets. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near the fireplace with his notebook open, felt his heart pound, sensing that the investigation into Dr. Ilias Varnholt's disappearance was reaching a critical juncture. The cryptic note, the cracked lens, the chemical ash, and the crescent moon symbol had woven a tapestry of clues. But now, as Poirot's probing deepened, one of the suspects was about to crack, revealing a partial truth that would shift the course of the mystery. Mies Amos, Poirot began, his voice soft yet resonant. We stand at the heart of a puzzle most intricate. Dr. Varnholt, locked within his laboratory, has vanished, leaving behind a note that speaks of ghosts, a lens that speaks of struggle, and a cipher that speaks of betrayal. The lies, they have surfaced, but the truth, it requires one of you to break the silence. And I, Hercule Poirot, believe that moment has come. The household sat in a semicircle of high-backed chairs, their expressions a study in unease. Mrs. Lavinia Varnholt's rigid composure was fraying, her lace handkerchief now a crumpled rag in her hands. Miss Beatrice Varnholt, her auburn hair falling loosely, stared at the floor, her eyes brimming with tears. Mr. Cornelius Blake's forced nonchalance had given way to a taut grimace, his fingers gripping the armrests. Mr. Gideon Finch, the butler, stood by the door, his gaunt face impassive, though his sunken eyes flickered with unease. Miss Sylvia Harrow, the housekeeper, sat rigidly, her hands clenched in her lap, her brisk manner replaced by a strained silence. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. The crescent moon symbol, found on the gear and in Dr. Varnholt's blueprint, it is no mere decoration. It links to the past of Silas Varnholt, betrayed a century ago. And now it appears again, in a manner where another inventor vanishes. Monsieur Finch, you claimed your pocket watch, bearing the same symbol, is a family heirloom. Yet I have learned from the village records that you served Silas Varnholt's partner, Mr. Reginald Thorne, before coming to Wraithmoor. Is this not true? Finch's gaunt frame stiffened, his voice low but steady. It's true, sir. I was a young man, employed by Mr. Thorne, but that was long ago, and I've served the Varnholts faithfully since. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Faithfully, monsieur? Yet the ash on your tray, identical to that in the laboratory, suggests you were closer to Dr. Varnholt's work than you claim. Why conceal this? Finch's lips parted, but before he could respond, Beatrice let out a choked sob, her hands covering her face. Oh, Mr. Poirot, I can't bear it any longer, she cried, her voice trembling with emotion. Uncle Elias was terrified. He said someone was after his invention, that it wasn't safe. I saw something that night, but I was too afraid to tell. The room erupted in murmurs, and Hastings leaned forward, his pen poised. Poirot's expression softened, his voice gentle but insistent. Mademoiselle Beatrice, courage now. What did you see? Beatrice's tears spilled over, her words halting. It was just before midnight. I couldn't sleep, so I went to the west corridor, near the laboratory. I saw a shadow moving near the door. It wasn't Uncle Elias, it was too tall, too quick. I thought it was the ghost, but now I think it was someone in the house. Mrs. Varnholt gasped, her handkerchief falling to the floor. Beatrice, why didn't you say something? You let us believe Elias was taken by some phantom. Beatrice's voice broke. I was frightened. Uncle Elias warned me not to trust anyone, not even family. He said his machine could destroy as much as it could create. Poirot's gaze sharpened, turning to Mr. Blake. Monsieur Blake, you were seen in the west corridor at 10:15 p.m., despite your claim of being in the library. A shadow at midnight, could it have been you? Blake's face darkened, his voice sharp. I told you, I stepped out briefly for a book. I was nowhere near the laboratory at midnight. Beatrice is mistaken, she was half asleep, imagining things. Poirot's smile was faint but piercing. Imagining, monsieur, or seeing what you wish to conceal. Your debts, your past with Dr. Varnholt, these are motives that cannot be ignored. He pivoted to Miss Harrow, whose hands trembled visibly. Mademoiselle Harrow, the tea you prepared, still warm at 6 a.m., suggests you were in the laboratory later than you claim. Did you see this shadow, or perhaps were you part of it? Harrow's face flushed, her voice rising. I've done nothing wrong. I prepared the tea as always. If it was warm, perhaps the laboratory's heat preserved it. I was in my room by 10 o'clock. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Heat, mademoiselle? The laboratory was cold when we entered. Another contradiction, non? Mrs. Varnholt, her composure crumbling, interjected. Mr. Poirot, enough. You accuse us all, but what of Elias's invention? Could someone from outside someone after his machine have done this? Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. Madame, the locked door, the barred windows, these suggest an inside hand. But your concern for the invention, it is telling. Did you fear its power, or its loss? Her lips trembled, and she looked away, unable to answer. Hastings, scribbling, furiously felt the room's tension reach a breaking point. Beatrice's confession had shifted the investigation, casting doubt on every alibi. The shadow in the corridor, was it Blake, as Japp suspected, or another? The crescent moon, the ash, the orrery's cipher, they all pointed to a deeper conspiracy, one tied to the manor's haunted past. Poirot stepped forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Mademoiselle Beatrice, your courage has illuminated a path. The shadow you saw, it is no ghost, but a person, driven by greed or fear. The crescent moon, it links this crime to Silas Varnholt's betrayal. Someone in this room knows more than they say. He turned to Inspector Japp, who stood by the fireplace, his face grim. Inspector, I require a search of the west corridor for any trace of this shadow fiber's footprints, anything. And Monsieur Finch's watch, it must be examined closely. The crescent moon, it is the key. Japp nodded, his notebook open. I'll get my men on it, Poirot. But Beatrice's story, it puts Blake in the frame, doesn't it? He's got the motive and the opportunity. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Motive, oui, but opportunity? The shadow, it may belong to another. The little gray cells, they are not yet satisfied. As the household dispersed, Beatrice's sobs echoing in the silence, Poirot lingered by the table, his fingers tracing the blueprint's crescent moon. Hastings, he said softly, the emotional break, it is the turning point. Beatrice has given us a glimpse of the truth, but the full picture, it remains hidden. The orrery, the ash, the shadow, they are pieces of a machine, and we must assemble them. Hastings, closing his notebook, felt a chill. The manor's secrets were unraveling, but the truth was still shrouded in shadows. Poirot's relentless logic was closing in, yet the ghost of Wraithmore Grange seemed to linger. Its presence felt in every creak and whisper. The investigation had turned a corner, but the path ahead was darker still. Chapter 9. The trap. The grand hall of Wraithmore Grange was steeped in an oppressive silence, broken only by the distant howl of the wind across the Devonshire moors and the faint ticking of the grandfather clock, marking the approach of evening. The flickering light of the chandelier cast eerie shadows on the oak-paneled walls, where the stern portraits of past Varnholt seemed to watch with silent accusation. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the hall, his small, immaculate figure radiating a quiet authority that belied the tension simmering among the gathered household. His dark eyes, sharp and unyielding, moved from face to face, applying a psychological pressure that seemed to tighten the air itself. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near a tall window with his notebook open, felt his pulse quicken, sensing that Poirot was setting a trap, ready to ensnare the guilty in the mystery of Dr. Elias Varnholt's disappearance. The household sat in a semicircle of high-backed chairs, their faces a tableau of fear, defiance, and barely concealed guilt. Mrs. Lavinia Varnholt's rigid posture had softened, her hands trembling as they clutched her crumpled handkerchief. Miss Beatrice Varnholt, her auburn hair disheveled, sat with red-rimmed eyes, her confession of seeing a shadow in the west corridor still echoing in the room. Mr. Cornelius Blake's forced calm had crumbled, his sharp features set in a scowl. As he avoided Poirot's gaze, Mr. Gideon Finch, the butler, stood by the door, his gaunt frame as still as a statue, though his sunken eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Miss Sylvia Harrow, the housekeeper, gripped the arms of her chair, her brisk demeanor replaced by a strained rigidity. "Mies Amos," Poirot began, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through the heavy silence, "we have reached a moment of truth. Dr. Varnholt, locked within his laboratory, has vanished, leaving behind a note. The ghost returns at midnight. A cracked lens, chemical ash, and a cipher on the orrery. The shadow seen by Mademoiselle Beatrice in the west corridor. It points to a human hand, not a ghost. Tonight, I, Hercule Poirot, shall set a trap to reveal the guilty." He paused, letting his words settle like a noose around the room. Hastings, scribbling furiously, noted the tension in each face: Mrs. Varnholt's trembling hands, Beatrice's tearful gaze, Blake's clenched jaw, Finch's rigid stillness, Harrow's shallow breaths. The crescent moon symbol, the ash, the warm tea, they were threads in a web of deception, and Poirot was about to pull them tight. Poirot stepped forward, holding up the tiny brass gear etched with a crescent moon. This gear, found in the laboratory's drawer, bears a symbol linked to Silas Varnholt, betrayed a century ago. It appears again in Dr. Varnholt's blueprint, suggesting his invention, the energy conduit, was tied to his ancestors' work. Someone in this room coveted that machine, or feared its power. Let us test your truths. He turned to Mr. Blake, whose scowl deepened. "Monsieur Blake, your debts and your past with Dr. Varnholt make you a suspect. You were seen in the west corridor at 10:15 p.m. near the laboratory. Yet you claim innocence. If you are truthful, you will not object to a search of your belongings now." Blake's face flushed, his voice sharp. "This is outrageous. I've nothing to hide, but I won't be treated like a common criminal." Poirot's smile was faint but piercing. "A man with nothing to hide does not protest so loudly, non. Inspector Japp, please proceed." Japp, standing by the door, nodded to a constable, who left to search Blake's room. Blake's eyes darted toward the exit, but he remained seated, his hands gripping the armrests. Poirot pivoted to Miss Harrow. "Mademoiselle Harrow, the tea you prepared for Dr. Varnholt was warm at 6 a.m., suggesting you were in the laboratory later than you claim. And the ash on your tray, it matches that found near the desk. Will you join me in the laboratory to explain this?" Harrow's face paled, her voice trembling. "I have told you, I was in the kitchen. The ash must have come from the laboratory. I won't be dragged into this." Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. "Then you will not mind if we examine the kitchen, to verify the time on your clock and the state of your tea leaves." Before Harrow could respond, Poirot turned to Mr. Finch. "Monsieur Finch, your pocket watch bears the crescent moon, a symbol tied to Silas Varnholt's partner, Reginald Thorne. You served him before coming to Wraithmoor. Did you bring more than loyalty to this house?" Finch's sunken eyes flickered, but his voice remained steady. "My watch is an heirloom, as I said. I know nothing of symbols or machines." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Bon, then you will not object to showing us the watch to compare its mark with the gear." Finch's hand moved instinctively to his waistcoat, but he nodded stiffly. "As you wish, sir." Poirot's gaze shifted to Mrs. Varnholt, whose trembling had intensified. "Madame, your letters to the solicitor suggest a motive to secure Dr. Varnholt's patents. Did you fear his machine would ruin the family, or did you seek to control it?" Mrs. Varnholt's voice broke. "I only wanted to protect our legacy. Elias was reckless, pouring everything into that dangerous device. I wrote to the solicitor to understand my rights, nothing more." Poirot stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And yet, madame, your blotting paper bore traces of a note in the same ink as Dr. Varnholt's message. Did you write to another, perhaps, to plan his disappearance?" A stifled gasp escaped Beatrice, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Hastings, his pen pausing, felt the weight of Poirot's trap closing in. The psychological pressure was relentless. Each Question a carefully placed barb designed to provoke a reaction. Poirot raised his hands, commanding silence. Tonight, we shall recreate the night of the disappearance. At midnight, I shall be in the laboratory, with the orrery and the note. The guilty, they will feel the weight of their secrets. Inspector Japp, ensure the west corridor is watched. The shadow it may return. Japp nodded, his face grim. I'll have my men posted, Poirot. But this midnight business, it's risky. What if the killer strikes again? Poirot's eyes gleamed. The killer, Inspector, is already among us. The trap, it is for them to betray themselves. As the household dispersed, their faces etched with fear and suspicion, Poirot led Hastings to the laboratory. The iron door creaked as they entered, the room's chaotic array of blueprints, and gears bathed in the dim glow of a single lamp. Poirot knelt by the orrery, tracing the scratches around Mars. The sequence 3, 7, 12, 19, it points to the drawers, but also to time perhaps. Midnight, the note says. We shall see what the shadows reveal. Hastings, peering at the blueprint, noted the crescent moon symbol again. Poirot, this symbol, it's everywhere. Could it be a code within the machine itself? Poirot's smile was triumphant. Precise, Hastings. The crescent moon, it is. The signature of betrayal, past and present. Tonight we shall see who bears its mark. The clock in the hall struck 10, its chimes echoing like a warning. Hastings felt a shiver, the manor's shadows seeming to close in. Poirot's trap was set, and the guilty, he knew, would soon feel its snare. The ghost of Wraithmoor Grange was no phantom, but a truth waiting to be unmasked, and Poirot's relentless logic was the key to its revelation. Chapter 10. The reveal. The grand hall of Wraithmoor Grange was cloaked in an oppressive darkness, broken only by the faint flicker of candles and the distant howl of the wind across the Devonshire moors. The grandfather clock in the corner struck midnight, its chimes resonating like a summons to judgment. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the hall, his small, meticulous figure commanding the attention of the assembled household. His dark eyes, gleaming with the intensity of a predator closing in on its prey, swept over the faces before him, each a mask of fear, guilt, or defiance. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near the fireplace with his notebook open, felt his heart pound, sensing that the trap Poirot had set was about to spring, revealing the truth behind Dr. Elias Varnholt's disappearance. The cryptic note, the cracked lens, the chemical ash, and the crescent moon symbol had led them to this moment, and now, Poirot was ready to unravel the mystery step by step. Mise Amos, Poirot began, his voice clear and resonant, cutting through the heavy silence. Tonight, we stand at the heart of a puzzle most intricate. Dr. Elias Varnholt, locked within his laboratory, vanished at midnight, leaving behind a note. The ghost returns at midnight. A cracked lens, chemical ash, and a cipher on the orrery. The shadow seen by Mademoiselle Beatrice, the lies of alibis, the crescent moon, they all point to a truth that can no longer be hidden. I, Hercule Poirot, shall now reveal what really happened. The household sat in a semicircle of high-backed chairs, their faces illuminated by the candlelight. Mrs. Lavinia Varnholt's hands trembled, her lace handkerchief a tattered remnant of her composure. Miss Beatrice Varnholt, her auburn hair falling loosely, stared at Poirot with wide, tearful eyes. Mr. Cornelius Blake's forced nonchalance had collapsed, his sharp features taut with apprehension. Mr. Gideon Finch, the butler, stood by the door, his gaunt frame rigid, his sunken eyes fixed on the floor. Miss Sylvia Harrow, the housekeeper, gripped the arms of her chair, her face pale and strained. Poirot stepped forward, holding up the cryptic note. Let us begin with the note. The ghost returns at midnight. It was written in Dr. Varnholt's hand, but under duress, I believe. The ink, it was hurried, the script uneven. This was no jest but a warning or a plea. He turned to the orrery, its brass planets glinting in the candlelight. The orrery, with its misaligned Mars and scratched cipher 3, 7, 12. 19 pointed us to the drawers in the laboratory. The vial of catalyst alpha, the singed diagram, the crescent moon gear, these were not random. They were Dr. Varnholt's message, left to guide us to the truth. Poirot's gaze settled on Mr. Blake, whose jaw tightened. Monsieur Blake, your debts and your past with Dr. Varnholt made you an obvious suspect. You were seen in the West Corridor at 10:15 p.m., despite your claim of being in the library. But you were not the mastermind, merely a pawn, driven by desperation. Blake's face flushed, his voice sharp. A pawn? I had nothing to do with Elias's disappearance. You've no proof. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Proof, monsieur, lies in the details. The crescent moon gear, it was not Dr. Varnholt's design, but that of Silas Varnholt, betrayed a century ago by his partner, Reginald Thorne. And you, Monsieur Finch? Poirot pivoted to the butler, whose gaunt face remained impassive. You served Thorne before coming to Wraithmoor. Your pocket watch, it bears the crescent moon, a symbol of Thorne's designs. You knew of Dr. Varnholt's machine, did you not? Finch's eyes flickered, but his voice was steady. I served Thorne, yes, but that was decades ago. My watch is an heirloom, nothing more. Poirot's smile was faint but piercing. Non, monsieur. The ash on your tray, identical to that in the laboratory, tells a different story. You were in the laboratory after 9:30 p.m., tampering with Dr. Varnholt's experiment. The warm tea, Mademoiselle Harrow, it was your doing, was it not? You delivered it later, to cover for Monsieur Finch. Harrow's face drained of color, her voice trembling. I only brought the tea as he asked. I didn't know what he was doing. A gasp rippled through the room, and Beatrice's hands covered her mouth. Mrs. Varnholt's handkerchief fell to the floor, her voice a whisper. Gideon, how could you? Poirot's gaze shifted to Mrs. Varnholt. Madame, you knew of the machine's value, and your letters to the solicitor reveal your desire to control Dr. Varnholt's patents. You did not act directly, but your silence enabled the crime. He stepped forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of revelation. The truth, Miss Amos, is this. Dr. Varnholt was not abducted, nor did he flee. He was murdered, his body hidden within the manor. The laboratory's locked door was a ruse, achieved by a simple trick. Finch, you used a duplicate key, kept from your days with Thorne, to lock the door from the outside after the deed was done. Finch's gaunt frame stiffened, his voice low. You've no evidence, Mr. Poirot. The laboratory was searched, no body was found. Poirot's eyes gleamed. The body, monsieur, is in the orrery. The misaligned Mars, it conceals a compartment, large enough for a man. The scratches 3, 7, 12, 19. They were Dr. Varnholt's final act, pointing us to the truth. Inspector Japp, please open the orrery. Japp, his face grim, signaled to a constable, who approached the orrery with a crowbar. The room held its breath as the brass sphere of Mars was pried open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, curled in an unnatural pose, was the body of Dr. Elias Varnholt, his face frozen in a look of betrayal. A faint trace of chemical ash on his coat. Beatrice screamed. Collapsing into her chair, Mrs. Varnholt covered her face, sobbing. Blake's jaw dropped, and Harrow's hands shook uncontrollably. Finch, however, remained still, his eyes cold and unyielding. Poirot continued, his voice relentless. Monsieur Finch, you poisoned Dr. Varnholt with a compound from his own experiments, perhaps catalyst alpha, unstable and deadly in high doses. You hid his body in the orrery, using the crescent moon gear to seal it, a nod to your old master, Thorne. You sought to steal the energy conduit's plans, to sell them and restore your family's honor, lost in Thorne's betrayal. Finch's voice was a low growl. You can't prove it, Poirot. Poirot's smile was triumphant. The ash on your tray, the duplicate key found in your quarters, the crescent moon on your watch, these are proof enough. And mademoiselle? Harrow, your complicity, it was born of loyalty to Finch, perhaps a promise of reward. Harrow sobbed, her voice breaking. He said it was just to scare Elias, to take the plans. I didn't know he'd kill him. Japp stepped forward, his handcuffs glinting. That's enough, Finch. You're under arrest. Harrow, you'll be coming too for questioning. As the constables led Finch and Harrow away, the room erupted in chaos. Beatrice's sobs, Mrs. Varnholt's protests, Blake's stunned silence. Poirot turned to Hastings, his expression calm but weary. The truth, mon ami, it is a heavy burden, but it restores order. Hastings, closing his notebook, shook his head. You knew all along, didn't you? The Ori, the crescent moon, it was all there. Poirot's eyes twinkled. The little gray cells, Hastings, they see what others overlook. The ghost of Wraithmoor was no specter, but a man's greed, echoing through time. As the hall emptied, the candles flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the ghosts of the past. The truth had been revealed, but its weight lingered, a testament to Poirot's genius and the darkness of human ambition. Chapter 11. The reflection, the drawing room of Blackthorn Manor, with its heavy velvet drapes and polished mahogany furniture, seemed to exhale a sigh of relief as the constable led Lady Eleanor Blackthorn away, her wrists bound by iron cuffs that clinked softly in the quiet. The remaining occupants, Dr. Mortimer Grayson, Miss Clara Henshaw, Mr. Reginald Thorpe, and the young maid Emily, sat in stunned silence, their faces a gallery of emotions, shock, relief, and in some, a lingering unease. The fire in the hearth crackled, its light casting flickering shadows across the room, as if the manor itself were reluctant to let go of its secrets. Captain Hastings, seated near a side table, closed his notebook with a trembling hand, his mind still reeling from the dramatic confession that had unraveled the mystery of Elias Warwick's murder. Sherlock Holmes, ever composed, stood by the tall window, gazing out into the moonlit night, his silhouette a study in quiet triumph. Holmes turned from the window, his eyes catching the soft glow of the lamps. His mustache twitched slightly, a sign Hastings had come to recognize as the detective's satisfaction at a puzzle well solved. "My dear Hastings," he said, his voice low and melodic, "the human mind, it is a labyrinth, is it not? So often, it seeks to hide its truths, but with order and method, those truths cannot remain concealed." Hastings nodded, still grappling with the weight of Lady Eleanor's confession. "It's extraordinary, Poirot," he said, his voice tinged with awe. "You saw through it all, the locked room, the tampered latch, the alibis. But how did you know it was Lady Eleanor? Her composure was so unshakable." Holmes smiled faintly, a glimmer of pride in his expression. "The composure, Hastings, it is often the mask of the guilty. Lady Eleanor was a woman of iron will. But the little gray cells, they observe what the heart betrays. Her visits to the workshop, her knowledge of the manor's mechanisms, her motive rooted in the preservation of her family's legacy, these were the threads that wove her guilt. The brass screw, it was the final knot in the tapestry." He crossed the room, pausing to adjust a slightly crooked candlestick on the mantelpiece, a gesture that spoke to his obsession with order. "Consider, my friend, the psychology of them. Crime. Lady Eleanor did not act from hatred, but from fear of ruin, of a future where the Blackthorn name would be reduced to ashes. Her actions were cold, calculated, yet beneath them lay a tempest of emotion. It is this contradiction, this human frailty, that I seek to understand." The others in the room stirred, their silence breaking as the reality of the night's events settled upon them. Dr. Grayson, his face pale, cleared his throat. "Monsieur Poirot," he said hesitantly, I confess I misjudged you. I thought your methods theatrical, but you've brought justice where I feared none would be found." Holmes inclined his head, accepting the compliment with his usual grace. Justice, Doctor, is not a spectacle. It is a necessity, achieved through the meticulous arrangement of facts. You too had your secrets, but they were not those of a murderer. Clara Henshaw, her eyes red from weeping, looked up at Holmes, her voice trembling. I loved Elias, she said softly. I thought he cared for me, but his work consumed him. If I had known what Lady Eleanor planned. Holmes raised a hand, his expression gentle but firm. Mademoiselle, the heart, it leads us to truths we cannot always bear. Your love for Warwick was genuine, but it was not your burden to prevent his fate. The fault lies with the one who pulled the trigger. Mr. Thorpe, adjusting his spectacles, spoke next, his tone clipped. And what of the invention? Warwick's steam engine, will it be lost now, buried with him? Holmes's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of disdain crossing his features. The invention, Monsieur Thorpe, was the spark that ignited this tragedy. Its fate is not my concern. My task was to uncover the truth, not to salvage the ambitions of a man now departed. Emily, the maid, remained silent, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Holmes's gaze lingered on her for a moment, and he spoke softly. You, Emily, saw more than you admitted. Your silence protected no one, yet it was born of fear. Courage. It comes in time, and you must find it within you. Hastings, watching the exchange, felt a pang of admiration for Holmes's ability to read not just clues, but people. He opened his notebook again, jotting down the detective's words, knowing. They would linger in his memory long after this night. Poirot, he ventured, do you ever find these cases troubling? The lies, the betrayal, the loss? Holmes turned to him, his expression inscrutable. Troubling, Hastings? No, the world, it is full of disorder, of chaos. My role is to impose order upon it, to bring clarity where there is confusion. Each case, it is a challenge to the little gray cells, a test of method. To feel troubled is to lose focus, and focus, my friend, is the key to truth. He moved toward the door, his steps deliberate, as if signaling the end of his time in this place. Come, Hastings, he said, his voice light but commanding. The air of Blackthorn Manor grows stale. We have done our work here, and there are other puzzles awaiting us. As they stepped into the cool night air, the manor looming behind them like a silent sentinel, Hastings glanced back at the windows, half expecting to see the ghostly figure of Elias Warwick watching them depart. The moon hung low, casting long shadows across the gravel drive, and the distant howl of the wind seemed to carry the echo of the inventor's unfulfilled dreams. Poirot, Hastings said as they walked toward their waiting carriage, do you believe in ghosts? The villagers spoke of Warwick's spirit haunting this place. Holmes paused, his eyes glinting with amusement. Ghosts, Hastings? Nong nong. The only ghosts are those of guilt, of secrets left unspoken. They haunt the living, not the dead. And one, Sherlock Holmes, have no need of specters when the truth is so much more revealing. With that, he climbed into the carriage, his silhouette sharp against the moonlit sky. Hastings followed, his mind buzzing with the events of the night. The weight of the case settling into his memory like a well-worn book. As the carriage rolled away from Blackthorn Manor, the detective's words lingered, a reminder of the power of logic to pierce even the darkest of mysteries. The manor faded into the distance, its secrets laid bare, and Holmes, ever the guardian of order, turned his thoughts to the next challenge, his little gray cells already at work. Chapter 12. Shadows of motive. The carriage rolled away from Blackthorn Manor, its wheels crunching against the gravel drive, as the moon cast a silver veil over the sprawling estate. Inside, Captain Hastings sat opposite Sherlock Holmes, the detective's face half illuminated by the flickering light of a lantern swaying with the carriage's motion. The air was cool, tinged with the scent of damp earth and pine, a stark contrast to the stifling tension of the manor's drawing room. Hastings's notebook lay open on his lap, its pages filled with hurried notes from the night's revelations, yet his mind churned with questions that lingered like the shadows trailing behind them. Holmes, as ever, appeared serene, his hands folded neatly, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the carriage window, as if the world outside held the next piece of a puzzle only he could see. Poirot. Hastings ventured, his voice breaking the rhythmic clatter of hooves. Lady Eleanor's confession, it was so sudden, so complete. But there's something I can't shake. Could there be more to this? Another layer we've missed? Holmes turned his head slightly, his mustache twitching with a faint smile. My dear Hastings, your instinct for the dramatic is commendable, but it must be tempered with logic. The case of Elias Warwick's murder is solved, the guilty party confessed. Yet you are right to sense a shadow, for the human heart is rarely content with a single motive. Let us reflect, then, on the undercurrents of Blackthorn Manor, for even in resolution, there are truths that remain unspoken. The carriage jolted over a rut, and Hastings steadied his notebook, his pen poised. You mean there might be accomplices? Or another motive we haven't uncovered? Holmes's eyes gleamed with that familiar spark of intellectual delight. Not accomplices, Hastings, but echoes of motive that ripple through the lives of those we left behind. The confession of Lady Eleanor, it was the keystone, but the arch of this mystery is built on the desires, fears, and secrets of all who dwelt in that house. Let us examine them, shall we, with the clarity of distance. He leaned back, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. A gesture Hastings knew signaled the unraveling of a new thread. Consider, first, the setting. Blackthorn Manor, isolated, grand, yet crumbling under the weight of its own history. A fitting stage for a tragedy, non? Elias Warwick, the forgotten inventor, was no mere recluse. His steam engine, a marvel of engineering, threatened to disrupt an empire of coal and tradition. Lady Eleanor, she saw this as a threat to her family's legacy, but was she alone in her fear? Hastings frowned, his mind racing to recall the suspect's alibis and behaviors. Dr. Grayson, perhaps. He had a history with Warwick, a falling out over their shared work. Precisement, Holmes said, his voice smooth as velvet. Dr. Mortimer Grayson, a man of science, yet one whose ambition outstripped his talent. His betrayal of Warwick years ago was not merely professional jealousy, but a wound to his pride. When Warwick returned to Blackthorn with his new invention, Grayson's presence at the manor was no coincidence. He claimed to be visiting for old time's sake, but the little gray cells, they suspect a deeper purpose. Did he hope to steal Warwick's designs once more, or to ensure they never saw the light of day? Hastings scribbled a note, his pen scratching against the paper. And Clara Henshaw, her love for Warwick seemed genuine, but you hinted at her guilt, her pain. Holmes nodded, his expression softening. Miss Clara, a woman of passion cloaked in fragility. Her love for Warwick was true, yet it was a love unreturned, consumed by his obsession with his work. Her tears, they were not only for his death, but for the rejection she endured. Could her despair have driven her to act, to confide in Lady Eleanor, perhaps, or to turn a blind eye to a plan she suspected? The heart, it is a powerful force, but it can also be a silent accomplice. The carriage slowed as it approached a small village inn where they would spend the night, the glow of its windows a welcome sight against the dark. Holmes continued, undeterred by the change in surroundings. Mr. Reginald Thorpe, the solicitor, is another piece of the puzzle. His role was to protect Warwick's patents, yet his demeanor suggested a man guarding more than legal documents. A deal with a rival company, perhaps, or a personal stake in the invention's failure. His alibi, so precise, was a construct of convenience, and his spectacles, they hid more than poor eyesight. And Emily, the maid, Hastings added, his voice tinged with curiosity. She seemed terrified, but you said she saw more than she admitted. Holmes's eyes narrowed, a flicker of intensity crossing his features. Emily, the invisible observer, the one who moves through the manor unnoticed. She heard the shot, yet said nothing until pressed. Her fear was not of ghosts, but of the living of someone in that house who held power over her. Was it Lady Eleanor, whose authority she feared, or another who coerced her silence? The little gray cells, they. Note her trembling hands, her averted gaze. She is a thread yet to be fully pulled. The carriage came to a stop, and the driver called out, signaling their arrival at the inn. Holmes stepped down with his usual grace, his coat billowing slightly in the night breeze. Hastings followed, clutching his notebook, his mind buzzing. With the detective's words. The inn's parlor was warm, its low ceiling and wooden beams a stark contrast to the grandeur of Blackthorn Manor. A fire roared in the hearth, and Holmes settled into a high-backed chair, gesturing for Hastings to join him. As they sat, a serving girl brought tea, and Holmes sipped his with deliberate care, his eyes never leaving the flames. The case, Hastings, it is closed, yet the shadows of motive linger. Lady Eleanor acted alone in the act of murder, but the motives of others, they intertwined, they overlapped, creating a web of suspicion. This is the nature of human conflict, Each person, they carry their own desires, their own fears, and these collide in ways that even they do not fully comprehend. Hastings leaned forward, his voice earnest. But why revisit this now, Poirot? Lady Eleanor confessed. The truth is out. Holmes set down his teacup, his gaze piercing. The truth, Hastings, is not a single note, but a symphony. To understand the crime, we must understand the hearts that shaped it. Lady Eleanor's fear of ruin was the spark, but the kindling was provided by Grayson's ambition, Clara's love, Thorpe's greed, and Emily's silence. Each played a part, however small, in the tragedy of Elias Warwick. He paused, his expression softening as he looked into the fire. This is why I, Sherlock Holmes, pursue order. The world, it is chaotic, full of passions that lead to destruction. My method, my logic, they bring clarity, they restore balance. And yet, even I must acknowledge the beauty of the human soul, flawed though it may be. Hastings sat back, his mind heavy with the weight of Holmes's philosophy. The fire crackled, its warmth a small comfort against the chill of the night and the lingering echoes of Blackthorn Manor. You make it sound almost poetic. Poirot, he said quietly, but it's a grim sort of poetry. Holmes smiled, rare warmth in his eyes. Poetry, Hastings, is the language of truth, whether grim or grand. Now, let us rest. The little gray cells, they require repose before the next challenge presents itself. As the inn grew quiet, Hastings opened his notebook once more, adding a final line. In the shadows of motive, Holmes finds the light of truth. Outside, the night stretched on, and the ghost of Elias Warwick, if it existed at all, was at last at peace. Chapter 13. The Echoes of Truth, the small parlor of the village inn, with its low beams and crackling fire, offered a cozy refuge from the chill of the autumn night. The scent of wood smoke mingled with the faint aroma of tea, and the soft clink of porcelain cups punctuated the quiet. Captain Hastings sat across from Sherlock Holmes, his notebook resting on the table, its pages now a chronicle of the dark events at Blackthorn Manor. The detective, impeccable as ever in his tailored suit, sipped his tea with a precision that belied the intensity of the case they had just resolved. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the faint echo of the storm that had cloaked Elias Warwick's murder. Hastings, his mind still tangled with the threads of motive and deception, leaned forward, his expression a mix of curiosity and unease. "Poirot," he began, his voice low to avoid disturbing the inn's other patrons, "you've unraveled the mystery, and Lady Eleanor's confession has brought justice. But I can't help feeling there's more to this, something about the manor, the people, that we haven't fully grasped. Why did it feel as though the house itself was complicit?" Holmes set his teacup down with a delicate clink, his eyes gleaming with that familiar spark of intellectual vigor. "Hastings, you have a poet's heart, always seeking the unseen. The house, it is but stone and wood, yet it absorbs the passions of those within it." Blackthorn Manor was not complicit, but it was a mirror, reflecting the fears, desires, and secrets of its inhabitants. Let us, then, explore these echoes of truth, for even a solved case leaves ripples that demand examination. He leaned back, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his gaze drifting to the fire as if it held the answers to questions yet unasked. The murder of Elias Warwick was a singular act, committed by Lady Eleanor, but it was born of a convergence of motives, each a shadow cast by the others. To understand the whole, we must consider the parts non. Let us reconstruct the tapestry, thread by thread, and see what patterns emerge. Hastings opened his notebook, his pen ready, though he wondered if he could capture the depth of Holmes's insight. "You mean the suspects Grayson, Clara, Thorpe, and Emily? Their motives weren't enough to make them murderers, but they played a role, didn't they?" "Precisement," Holmes said, his voice smooth and measured. "Each was a piece of the puzzle, their actions and silences shaping the crime. Even if they did not pull the trigger. Consider Dr. Grayson, the scientist whose ambition once rivaled Warwick's genius. His presence at the manor, under the guise of reconciliation, was no accident. The little gray cell suspect he sought to reclaim a piece of Warwick's success, perhaps by studying the steam engine or sabotaging its progress. His alibi reading in his room at 11:30 p.m. was corroborated by no one, and his nervous demeanor betrayed a man haunted by more than guilt." Hastings nodded, recalling Grayson's fidgeting hands during Holmes's questioning. "And Clara? Henshaw, her love for Warwick seemed so intense, yet you suggested it might have driven her to complicity." Holmes's mustache twitched, a sign of his approval. "Miss Clara, she was a woman caught in the torment of unrequited love. Her visits to Warwick's workshop, her tearful confessions, they spoke of a heart broken not only by his death, but by his indifference. Did she know of Lady Eleanor's intentions? Perhaps not directly, but her silence, her refusal to question the oddities of that night, suggests a passive complicity. She wished to protect Warwick's memory, even at the cost of truth." The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney, and Holmes's eyes followed them, as if tracing the trajectory of a thought. "Mr. Reginald Thorpe, the solicitor, is a study in avarice disguised as duty. His role was to safeguard Warwick's patents, yet his precise alibis and guarded responses hinted at a man with secrets. Was he negotiating with a rival company? As I suspected. The little gray cells note his late-night meetings, his hurried notes, and his reluctance to discuss the invention's future. His motive was not murder, but profit, and in that pursuit, he turned a blind eye to the tensions brewing in the manor." "And Emily," Hastings interjected, his voice tinged with sympathy for the young maid. "She seemed so frightened, so out of place among the others." Holmes's expression softened, though his tone remained firm. Emily, the invisible witness, saw more than she dared admit. Her claim of being in the kitchen at 11:47 p.m., preparing bread, was a fragile shield. The shot that killed Warwick echoed through the manor, and she heard it, yet her silence was a choice born of fear. Was she protecting Lady Eleanor, her mistress, or another whose influence held her in thrall? Her trembling hands, her averted gaze, they spoke of a secret she could not voice. The little gray cells, they see her as a mirror of the manor's own silence. Hastings scribbled furiously, his mind racing to keep pace with Holmes's analysis. The inn's parlor, with its warm light and homely comforts, felt a world away from the oppressive grandeur of Blackthorn Manor, yet the detective's words brought the case vividly back to life. "So, you're saying they all contributed to the atmosphere that allowed the murder to happen? Even if they didn't know it?" Holmes nodded, his eyes narrowing. "The human soul, Hastings, is a web of contradictions. Each suspect, in their way, created the conditions for Lady Eleanor's act. Grayson's ambition, Clara's despair, Thorpe's greed, Emily's fear, they were the kindling, and Lady Eleanor's desperation was the spark. This is the tragedy of Blackthorn Manor, not one villain, but a chorus of flaws that sang in harmony. The serving girl returned, offering to refill their tea, but Holmes waved her away with a polite smile. He rose, adjusting his cuffs with meticulous care, and gestured toward the door. "Come, Hastings. The night grows late, and the little gray cells, they require rest. But before we retire, let us take a moment to walk beneath the stars. The air, it clears the mind." Outside, the village was quiet, its cobblestone streets bathed in moonlight. The wind had softened to a gentle breeze, carrying the faint scent of hay from nearby fields. Holmes walked with his usual precision, his cane tapping lightly against the ground while Hastings followed, his thoughts still tethered to the manor. The stars above glittered like scattered clues, and for a moment, Hastings imagined they formed the constellation of the case, a locked room, a revolver, a brass screw. "Poirot," he said, breaking the silence, "do you ever wonder what becomes of places like Blackthorn Manor after a case like this? The people, the secrets, they don't just vanish." Holmes paused, his gaze lifting to the sky. "The manor, it will endure, as all such places do. Its walls will hold the echoes of this tragedy, but the people, they will move forward, scarred but changed. Grayson will seek redemption, Clara will mourn, Thorpe will chase new schemes, and Emily perhaps will find her voice. As for us, Hastings, we move on to the next puzzle, for the world is full of mysteries. And the little gray cells, they are never idle." They returned to the inn, the warmth of the parlor welcoming them back. Hastings added a final note to his journal. The echoes of truth linger, but Holmes's logic cuts through them all. As he closed the book, he felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that, with Holmes, no shadow could remain unlit. Chapter 14. The net tightens the village inn's parlor, with its low ceiling and flickering firelight, seemed a world apart from the brooding grandeur of Blackthorn Manor, yet the weight of the case still hung heavy in the air. Captain Hastings sat at a small oak table, his notebook open before him, its pages dense with the intricate details of Sherlock Holmes's investigation. The detective himself stood by the window, his silhouette sharp against the moonlit glass, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed into the night. The soft creak of the inn's floorboards and the distant hoot of an owl were the only sounds, a stark contrast to the storm that had masked Elias Warwick's murder. Hastings's pen hovered, his mind racing with the threads Holmes had woven. The locked room, the tampered latch, the motives converging like shadows in a storm. Yet something in the detective's posture suggested the net was not yet fully drawn. Holmes turned, his eyes gleaming with a quiet intensity, his mustache twitching as if in anticipation of a final act. "Hastings," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "the case of Elias Warwick is resolved. Yet the human heart, it is never so simple as a single confession. Lady Eleanor's guilt is certain, but the echoes of Blackthorn Manor, they whisper of deeper truths. We must return, mon ami, to ensure no shadow remains unexamined." Hastings blinked, his pen pausing. "Return?" "But Poirot," Lady Eleanor confessed. "The constable has taken her. What more is there to uncover?" Holmes's smile was faint, almost enigmatic. "The confession, it is the keystone, but the arch is built of many stones. The little gray cells, they sense a ripple, a detail not yet fully illuminated. We shall return to the manor at dawn, to walk its halls once more, and ensure that justice is not only served, but complete." The next morning, as the first light of dawn painted the sky in hues of rose and gold, Holmes and Hastings set out in the carriage, the village receding behind them. Blackthorn Manor loomed ahead, its stone facade less ominous in the soft morning light, yet still heavy with the weight of its secrets. The gravel crunched underfoot as they approached, and the great oak door creaked open, revealing the butler. Mr. Harrow, whose lined face betrayed a mix of weariness and resignation. "Monsieur Poirot," Harrow said, bowing slightly, "I did not expect your return. The household is much subdued after last night's events." Holmes inclined his head, his expression courteous but firm. "Monsieur Harrow, the truth, it is a delicate thing, and I must ensure no fragment remains hidden. Please summon Dr. Grayson, Miss Clara, Mr. Thorpe, and Emily to the library. There is one final matter to address." The library, with its towering shelves and set of aged leather, was as imposing as ever, though the morning light softened its shadows. The suspects gathered slowly, their faces a study in exhaustion and unease. Dr. Grayson's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his collar. Clara Henshaw's eyes were red-rimmed, her handkerchief clutched tightly. Mr. Thorpe's spectacles glinted as he avoided Holmes's gaze. And Emily, the maid, stood near the door, her posture rigid with apprehension. Hastings took his place by a writing desk, his notebook ready, his heart pounding with anticipation. Holmes stood at the center of the room, his presence commanding, his voice cutting through the tension like a finely honed blade. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "the murder of Elias Warwick has been solved, and Lady Eleanor Blackthorne has confessed to her crime. Yet the little gray cells, they are restless. A crime of such precision requires not only motive and opportunity, but a certain complicity, however unwitting, from those around it. Today we shall tighten the net and ensure no truth remains obscured." Dr. Grayson shifted uncomfortably, his voice hoarse. "Monsieur Poirot, what more can there be? Lady Eleanor acted alone. You heard her confession." Holmes raised a hand, his eyes narrowing. "Alone in the act, perhaps, but not in the atmosphere that enabled it. Let us revisit the night of the murder, shall we? The storm, it raged, cloaking the sound of the fatal shot. The workshop, locked and latched, appeared impenetrable. Yet the brass screw, found beneath the desk, told a different story, a story of a window tampered with, not by chance, but by design." He paced slowly, his cane tapping lightly against the polished floor. Lady Eleanor's motive was clear. The steam engine threatened her family's coal empire. But the execution of such a plan required knowledge of Warwick's habits, of the manor's mechanisms, of the precise moment to strike. This knowledge, it was not hers alone. Clara Henshaw gasped, her voice trembling. "You cannot mean to accuse us further. I loved Elias, I would never have helped her." Holmes's gaze softened, but only slightly. "Mademoiselle Clara, your love was a beacon, but it was also a blindness. Your frequent visits to the workshop, your conversations with Lady Eleanor, did you not perhaps mention Warwick's late-night habits, his solitude? Unknowingly, you provided a piece of the puzzle." Clara's face crumpled, and she buried it in her handkerchief. Holmes turned to Dr. Grayson, his tone sharp. "And you, Doctor, your presence at the manor was no mere visit. The little gray cells suspect you lingered near the workshop that night, hoping to glimpse Warwick's designs. Did you see Lady Eleanor enter? Did you choose silence to protect your own ambitions?" Grayson's face flushed, his hands clenching. "I saw nothing. I was in my room, as I told you." Holmes's eyes flicked to Mr. Thorpe, whose composure seemed to waver. "And you, Monsieur Thorpe, the solicitor who knew the value of Warwick's patents. Your late-night wanderings, your guarded notes, did you not suspect Lady Eleanor's intentions? Your silence, it was a choice, was it not, to protect your own interests?" Thorpe adjusted his spectacles, his voice tight. "I am a man of law, Monsieur Poirot. I had no part in this." Finally, Holmes's gaze settled on Emily, who shrank under his scrutiny. "And you, Emily, the maid who hears all. You heard the shot, yet you said nothing until pressed. Was it fear of Lady Eleanor, or loyalty to another? Your silence, it allowed the illusion of a locked room to persist." Emily's eyes filled with tears, her voice barely audible. I was afraid, sir. I didn't know what to do." Holmes nodded, his expression somber. "Fear, ambition, love, greed. These are the threads that wove the net around Elias Warwick. Lady Eleanor pulled the trigger, but each of you, in your way, tightened that net. The little gray cells, they see all, and they forgive nothing." The room fell silent, the weight of Holmes's words pressing down like a physical force. Hastings's pen scratched across the page, capturing the tension, the guilt, the unspoken truths. "And now," Holmes continued, "the net is drawn. The truth is complete, and justice, it shall stand. But let this be a lesson, mes amis. The smallest silence, the tiniest omission, can cast a shadow that leads to tragedy." He turned to Hastings, his voice softening. "Come, my friend. Our task here is done. Let us leave Blackthorn Manor to its ghosts and its lessons." As they stepped into the morning light, the manor's shadow seemed to linger, a reminder of the fragile balance between truth and deception. Hastings glanced back, his heart heavy, knowing that Holmes's net had caught not only a murderer, but the very essence of human frailty. Chapter 15. The final veil. The morning sun bathed Blackthorn Manor in a golden glow, softening its stern stone facade, yet the air within its walls remained heavy with the residue of secrets unveiled. The library, where Sherlock Holmes had just concluded his final confrontation, was now silent, save for the faint rustle of leaves outside and the occasional creak of the ancient floorboards. The suspects, Dr. Mortimer Grayson, Miss Clara Henshaw, Mr. Reginald Thorpe, and the maid Emily sat. In their chairs, their faces a tapestry of guilt, relief, and quiet shame. Captain Hastings stood by the writing desk, his notebook brimming with the intricate details of the case, his heart still racing from the weight of Holmes's revelations. The detective himself, impeccable in his tailored suit, stood at the center of the room, his presence a beacon of order amid the chaos of human frailty. His mustache twitched slightly, a sign of satisfaction, as he prepared to draw the final veil from the mystery of Elias Warwick's murder. Holmes clasped his hands behind his back, his eyes sweeping over the assembled company with a gaze that was both piercing and compassionate. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice a melodic cadence that filled the room, "the tragedy of Elias Warwick has been laid bare. Lady Eleanor Blackthorn, driven by fear of ruin, took his life in a calculated act disguised as a locked-room suicide. Yet, as I have shown, the crime was not hers alone to bear. Each of you, in your silence, your ambitions, your fears, contributed to the shadow that fell upon this house. The little gray cells, they have seen all, and now the final veil of truth must be lifted." Dr. Grayson, his face pale and drawn, leaned forward, his voice trembling. "Monsieur Poirot, you have exposed our failings, but what more can there be?" Lady Eleanor confessed, "The case is closed." Holmes's smile was faint, almost wistful. "The case, doctor, is closed, but the truth, it is never so tidy. The murder of Elias Warwick was a symphony of motives, and though Lady Eleanor played the final note, the melody was composed by all of you. Let us, then, examine the final threads, to ensure no shadow remains." He paced slowly, his cane tapping rhythmically against the polished floor, each step a deliberate punctuation to his thoughts. The night of the murder, at precisely 11:47 p.m., a shot rang out in the workshop, cloaked by the storm's fury. The revolver, wiped clean, was placed to suggest suicide, and the brass screw, loosened from the window latch, was the key to the illusion of a locked room. But the little gray cells, they asked, how did Lady Eleanor, a woman of refinement, execute such a precise plan? The answer lies in the knowledge she gleaned from those around her. Holmes turned to Clara Henshaw, whose tear-streaked face betrayed her anguish. "Mademoiselle Clara, your love for Warwick was a flame that burned brightly, yet it cast a shadow. Your conversations with Lady Eleanor, your tales of Warwick's late-night work in the workshop, did you not, unwittingly, provide her with the map to his solitude? Your heart, it sought to protect him, but in sharing his habits, you gave her the moment to strike. Clara's sob broke the silence, her hands clutching her handkerchief. I never meant. I only spoke of him because I cared. I didn't know. Holmes raised a hand, his tone gentle but firm. Intent, mademoiselle, is not always guilt, but it is a thread in the tapestry. And you, Dr. Grayson, he continued, turning to the scientist, your ambition was a shadow of its own. Your presence at the manor, your lingering near the workshop did. You not see Lady Eleanor that night, entering with purpose? Your silence, it was a choice to protect your own hopes of reclaiming Warwick's genius. Grayson's jaw tightened, his eyes dropping to the floor. I saw movement, perhaps, but I thought nothing of it. I swear I had no part in his death. Holmes's gaze shifted to Mr. Thorpe, whose spectacles glinted in the morning light. And you, Monsieur Thorpe, the solicitor whose duty was to Warwick's legacy. Your knowledge of the manor's layout, your late-night wanderings, did you not suspect Lady Eleanor's growing desperation? Your notes, they spoke of deals, of patents, of profit. Your silence, it was not fear, but calculation. Thorpe's face flushed, but he remained silent, his lips pressed into a thin line. Holmes's eyes then fell on Emily, who stood near the door, her hands twisting her apron. And you, Emily, the quiet observer. You heard the shot, yet you said nothing, fearing the wrath of your mistress. But was it only Lady Eleanor you feared, or another whose influence held you silent? Your eyes, they saw more than you admitted. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. I was scared, sir. I didn't know what it meant, but I couldn't. Speak. Holmes nodded, his expression somber. Fear, ambition, love, greed. These are the threads that wove the net around Elias Warwick. Lady Eleanor's act was the culmination, but each of you, in your way, tightened that net. The little gray cells, they see the truth in its entirety, and they demand that it be spoken. He paused, stepping to the center of the room, his voice rising with quiet authority. The final veil, it is this. No one in this house is without stain. The murder was Lady Eleanor's, but the conditions that made it possible were yours. The brass screw, the locked door, the storm's chaos, these were tools. But the true weapon was the silence of those who knew and did not act. Let this be your lesson. The truth, it is a flame that burns away deception, and none can escape its light. The room was silent, the weight of Holmes's words settling like dust after a storm. Hastings's pen scratched across the page, capturing the finality of the moment, his heart heavy with the realization of how deeply the manor's inhabitants had been entangled. Dr. Grayson's shoulders slumped. Clara's tears fell freely. Thorpe's face remained impassive, and Emily's eyes glistened with unspoken regret. Holmes turned to Hastings, his voice softening. Come, my friend, our work here is done. The truth has been unveiled, and Blackthorn Manor must now face its own reckoning. As they stepped into the hall, the butler, Mr. Harrow, bowed low, his face etched with gratitude and sorrow. Monsieur Poirot, you have brought clarity to this house. We are in your debt. Holmes inclined his head, his expression unreadable. Clarity, Monsieur Harrow, is its own reward. But guard this house well, for its shadows are deep. Outside, the morning air was crisp, the manor's silhouette stark against the rising sun. Hastings glanced back, his notebook clutched tightly, as the carriage awaited. Poirot, he said quietly, do you ever tire of this? Uncovering such darkness, only to leave it behind? Holmes paused, his cane resting lightly on the gravel. Tire, Hastings? None. The darkness, it is the canvas upon which the little gray cells paint order. Each case, it is a challenge, a reminder that truth, however painful, restores balance. And one, Sherlock Holmes, am its servant. They climbed into the carriage, the manor fading into the distance as the horses pulled them away. Hastings added, "A final note to his journal. The final veil is lifted, and truth stands alone." As the road stretched ahead, the ghost of Elias Warwick seemed at last to rest, leaving only the echo of Holmes's relentless logic in its wake.